So crazy. I have to say though, I struggled just trying to get that video done and right. It's hard to like kind of say
Hmm.
this stuff.
Say more about that. We're recording, by the way, so share a
You're
little.
right. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh gosh.
because it's
Golly.
kind of
So
topical. It's kind of why we're here.
yeah, I will say this, and it's kind of like this era in my life with this podcast is as a dad, I feel as a dad who feels compelled to speak out on behalf of dads about being a dad, about being a parent. It really has prompted me to go, I need to put some voice to my values. It just seems like the right thing to do, and a lot of that is reading the room and truly like for the first, especially with the cheap eats era and that cable TV era, I was very much jettisoned into that position because of, frankly, talent who misspoke on Twitter. Period. Point blank. I don't know if we've ever really got into that, you and I, Neil. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to say it too. This is what went down. What happened is, Adam Richman had made some comments on Twitter, and it had a blowback. He had a show called Secret Eats, I believe it was called, that Travel kind of shelved. It eventually came back on Cooking Channel, but he was put in jail for a bit. He got out, and not to really say anything pro or against him, just kind of stating that fact, and that caused a stir. And also Eddie Wong, who is
Not,
someone.
we should say he wasn't literally put in jail, right?
No, sorry. TV talk. They shelved his show. They shelved his show for a bit.
So what did do you remember like the gist of what Adam Richman said? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going from memory here, and so hopefully I'm totally accurate. But I kind of remember this well. But this was during a period where he had lost a tremendous amount of weight, actually. And, he was sharing these things on social media. And, like someone of his stature, really any of us, we post something. I posted something, and people come at you. So people are coming at him, saying mean things and stuff. I think he had gotten into a back and forth with someone. Oh, you know what it was? What it was he used a hashtag called Thintastic, which apparently is something that's in, as it was, because hashtags are so dated, right? We're talking 2013 here. The hashtag was associated with the community, and I'm using a Neil word, community, with the community that is actually, I believe, pro anorexia. I'll be honest, anorexia and bulimia, I kind of confuse the terms or whatever, but it's a eating disorder community, right? And it is someone, it's for people that are like who like to engage in an eating disorder. So he was called out for that. And social media comments, you take it personally and you go back and forth, and Lord knows I've been there as an individual. I think he had said something back. The retort was draw a bath and fetch a razor. Like, it's basic, like, it's shit talk. It's like, yeah, go kill yourself. I have a comment right now. Someone's like, fuck you, go kill yourself. People are saying this on my post. Hey, yeah, fuck you, go kill yourself. You're like, Jesus Christ,
I gotta be
okay.
honest. No, I get that a lot on our Nirvana post, but my first thought was like, go shave, you hairy animal. Like when you said fetch a razor, I'm like, yeah, you gotta go shave yourself. You're unkempt. But
No, no.
he was telling people to end it.
Yeah, and again, I'm quoting from memory here, but basically, like, yeah, Travel's like, it blew up in the wrong way, and so that happened, and then Eddie Wong, who I enjoyed Wong's World, I still enjoy his content and his point of view, but I think he said something, he basically like now I don't know in this Trump 2.0 era if this would even make any waves, but he said something not nice about Guy Fieri. And Guy picked up the phone apparently and was like, who's this guy you have a pilot with? Because he's talking shit on me. So not into that. And they pulled the plug on that.
I've got to look into that. You don't
Oh
you
yeah.
don't upset the king, you know.
Yeah. And that I can give you. I can give you names and dates because I was inside Chelsea when I had that conversation.
Boy,
Again, hearing all this
boy.
stuff.
We're gonna have to bring Todd Weiser back and ask for his POV.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can vouch for all this stuff. This was before his reign as SVP back then. This is
Mm,
all such topical information. World's greatest dad. But
very
anyway,
important. we're here to talk about. So let's land the plane.
Yeah, chop all
So
this.
the reason you bring all this up is, I guess you've been reticent in the past to give your political, social point of view on social media because you want to appeal to everybody. And,
Yeah.
you know, everybody's money is green, Michael Jordan said about Republicans buying Nikes, I believe. It's in The Last
Wow.
Dance. Go check it out. Yeah. He took a lot of heat for that. You know, you look at like LeBron James, very big on social activism, obviously, you know, in a moment of like when the George Floyd murder happened and Black Lives Matters kind of resurgence versus Michael Jordan was just happy to take anyone's money. But that's not what we're talking about here. But we kind of are. A lot of people in the public sphere, which I guess like literally is almost everybody now. Andy Warhol's prediction about 15 minutes of fame has kind of come to
True.
pass. We're all living our own little Truman Show online, and so a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't want to say anything because you know it'll piss off half my viewers, half my listeners, half the people that buy barbecue sauce from me. I'm not going to wade into that." And I think the whole thing is like, well, don't we kind of have a moral responsibility? And we're going to get into all of this because this is our ICE episode, our what the fuck is happening in our country episode, which I guess you could say has probably been happening for 250 years. But, you know, we are in this moment now. We're not talking about the abolition of slavery or, you know, getting women the right to vote. There's a lot of fucked up things happening. But in this moment, in 2026, the winter of 2026, probably the most fucked up thing that is happening in our country right now is that there is this secret police force called the ICE agency, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, I guess, that seems to be just killing people haphazardly who are exercising their First Amendment rights to protest what they are doing. Of course, they are also doing many other things. They're kidnapping kids and using them as bait to arrest their relatives. And then people are videoing these things, these heinous crimes against humanity, and then putting them online. And a lot of people are getting hurt and in some cases killed for daring to shine a light on literally just what they're doing. So, you know, it's really hard to stay neutral. And Ali, I'm kind of just setting up the context for what you started talking about, which is that you created a video kind of talking about this moment as a human being, as an American, as a parent, and you were met with some really thoughtful feedback on Facebook. Is that right?
Yeah, Facebook was pretty wild. Instagram, it also too, what an interesting way to kind of read the room a bit. Instagram felt pretty positive, and granted, it was a smaller reach for a variety of reasons. I have a really strong Facebook dispersion for video content last year or so. And so, yeah, it gets a lot of views and, you know, people can say, oh, you know, Facebook's more conservative and older. I'm like, yeah, sure, I guess, whatever. But, you know, it's also sadly the sign of any kind of quote successful content is getting people who hate and love you. You either get ignored, you get your friend, your Aunt Gladys is like, oh, you were so good up there. I was so proud. And then you have people going, I wish your face would explode, but it already did. And meanwhile, that same person's watching 20 of my videos. So that's pretty much what success looks like in 2026. Look, I saw some content creators share some stuff, and the thing is like, it's really hard to be a creator and not take part in the platform and be an audience member. And the reality is social media is simply just the TV of the right now of our modern era. And, you know, you can't ignore stuff that's happening. I mean, this is stuff that's happening. And it, you know, I saw other people jump in and say something out of just a good conscience. And it's kind of, to me, this was something like a George Floyd, you know, where like, it's like, my God, somebody died. You know, this is wrong. I'm going to, you know, show support and solidarity. And yeah, it was pretty much as simple as that. And also, you know, it's funny too. For a long time, I felt like, you know, a big thing is, well, if you go into these waters, go into quote politics, and you have to, you have to be in it. You have to really be in there and defend it. And what I saw in reading the room and what this moment made sense is people are just saying, you know what, I'm jumping in right now. Because it's really easy to get caught up in the and P.S. You'll see this on my threads. On threads, I'm resharing and jumping into the fray because it is infuriating. But this was something more kind of more constructed and meant to be like, you know what, given this moment, this needs to be said. And I was inspired by other people who, frankly, had the guts to do it. And so I was just the second wave on Normandy, more like the fifth. But I still went.
But I think that's also, we were kind of talking about it earlier. I mean, that's kind of what I mean about the positive influence. You saw other people speaking up and you thought, all right, well, then I should speak up too. And I think that is the hope that will, God willing, be shared and felt through the rest of the country, is this kind of apoplectic just gall at like the lies, the gaslighting. And I think, so we're talking obviously about, Minneapolis is really under attack by this agency who says that their purpose is to protect citizens from dangerous criminals, human traffickers. And yet what we're seeing is these images, these videos, and hearing kind of personal firsthand accounts of essentially terrorism. And the irony, of course, is they call these protesters and demonstrators domestic terrorists, but really it feels like the ICE agents themselves are domestic terrorists, right? Because in the two highest profile videos now of essentially murders that are being broadcast live in some cases and then streamed over and over are, of course, Renee Good and Alex Pretty. And the worst of our society, the dregs of our society, if you will, the people who, if we were to caricature them, the ones who are living in their, in the basement in just Nowheresville, are kind of posting memes about how they're feeling pretty good at watching innocent people be murdered. But I think, the hardest part of this, I mean, there's so many hard parts of this emotionally, right? Watching someone be killed, and the violence certainly is ratcheting up. It feels like political violence. Obviously, we had Charlie Kirk's murder last year, which was very divisive for the country. No matter what you thought or felt about him, it was a very divisive moment. We had January 6th, a few years ago, which was Trump sending insurgents to essentially attempt to stage a coup and murder elected officials. They were unsuccessful. But, Hitler was unsuccessful a number of times until he was. And then he wasn't again. So, history is not a straight line. It's kind of zigs and zags. And this guy is not given up, nor are his most ardent supporters. And I think, you look at the murders of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, I'm not sure how to say it. And I think what is so disturbing, besides the act themselves, is the reaction to it from our federal government and kind of their bootlickers who are saying that's not what happened, when we're watching it happen in front of our eyes. They're saying, well, he brandished a weapon, and you're watching and there is no weapon inside. They're saying, well, don't bring a gun to a rally or a protest. And then you see these images of Kyle Rittenhouse, who is a folk hero, who is holding like a massive, weapon of war. And so I think that the cognitive dissonance for most rational people, and I was like both disturbed by my own reaction to this, but also kind of delighted that I saw Billy Bush did a video,
I know, I saw that too.
And here is this guy who was on the bus with this serial predator kind of egging him on. I mean, and I'm talking, of course, of grab him by the pussy moment, where our president, Donald J. Trump, bragged about being able to sexually assault women and thought it was so funny, and Billy Bush kind of laughing along with him. And so to hear Billy Bush even be like horrified at this and saying, can we not believe our eyes? And so, and a lot of people have been sharing this quote. I don't know if you read 1984 by George Orwell in school. He was an author. He wrote Animal Farm and he wrote 1984.
I read Farm. I read Farm, and I've seen it's so funny. Everyone's quoting '84 because it's actually happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so and the quote that seems to be shared most is the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final most essential command.
Hmm.
And what do you do when you are watching something and then being told that's not what you're watching? And that is essentially what the Trump administration, what ICE, what the people who support this president, this administration are kind of coming out. It's the fuck your feelings people who are like facts, not feelings. And then we're going, hey, 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 facts, not feelings. These are facts. Look,
Hmm.
this is a woman who is very clearly driving away,
Hmm.
very clearly saying, I'm not mad at you, kind of acknowledging like you're just doing a job, a shitty job that
Hmm.
these people in power are paying you to do, and trying to exculpate herself and take herself out of the situation. And this guy killing her in cold blood, and then after killing her saying fucking bitch. I mean, like the misogyny that is just intertwined with all of this. And that's a direct quote. He shot Renee Good and then afterwards said, fucking bitch, which not a big vocabulary for this guy, but like that's the reaction. It kind of does speak to motive for any rational human being. And then you look at again the circumstances of the Alex Pretty murder, and they threw a woman to the ground, and he was attempting to help her. You see from the footage from many different angles. He was armed, I guess, in that he was carrying in an open carry state, but not pointing a weapon at anyone. And then you look at the freeze frame, essentially, they shot him point blank in the head just for helping a woman after he had already been pepper sprayed. And then you think about all of these people that they were able to arrest without incident, without having to shoot them. I think about Dylan Roof, Kyle Rittenhouse. Dylan
Hmm.
Roof famously murdered a bunch of black people in a church who were just there for a service. And then they got him Burger King. And so you think about, well, how does this happen? And I think, I want to believe we're at this breaking point as a country. And yet then you post a video on Facebook saying, this is not right, and you get this flurry of reactions. And
Yeah.
so,
And, that's there. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is going to be something that will be provocative. And we're also here because of that, because we're in a place where people are rushing to the comments boards and saying all this insightful stuff, like insightful violence and rhetoric is everywhere. It's rampant. And in the digital age, I mean, that's how you can get a insurrection. That's how you can get a January 6th, is because of social media, internet, website, boards. Like, let me hear what you think. Let me solicit a reaction, all this stuff. I will say this. I mean, if we're going to be able to turn the page, it's going to take people like a Billy Bush, because, I've always been someone who has pretty much every election I voted for. And I'm not trying to like tout myself as like, I'm the number one Democratic Party, but that's where I end up voting. And I do mean end up, this is what I got, everything is so perfect. But I think in order to turn this page, is like we need all the Billy Bushes we can get, to really gut this thing and to frankly, pull the Republican Party back to, let's get us back to, where we were at in the 80s, even too, which sounds funny, but like, it was a far more civil time in Congress.
and I struggle with that, right? I think because like the reality is a lot of the inequality that exists today is because of Reaganomics, because of the Gordon Gekko greed is good ethos. I mean, Reagan also famously homophobe who did absolutely nothing to help with the AIDS epidemic. In fact, probably almost definitely made it much worse. And so, I do think I do struggle with this idea of like waxing nostalgic for this time where Democrats and Republicans could kind of shake hands and be buds, even though one side was trying to strip away rights from citizens. But yeah, at the same time, I am a human being who does watch that Billy Bush video and go, wow, okay, at least he understands this is wrong. And maybe someone will listen to him. So, I kind of see it from both those angles, but I'm curious, my kids have absolutely zero idea about any of this happening. It's not something that we are racing to talk to them about. God knows there's enough stuff, issues in our own community and other global issues that they are aware of. They don't know what ICE is. They haven't had any friends or neighbors that they know of who've been taken or affected by it. I want to say thankfully, but it's also like, that's that kind of like, oh, well, at least we're okay, kind of shitty, selfish thing. Of course, you want to shield your kids where you can.
Mm-hmm.
Your kid is 14. I can't imagine this is not bubbled up, or him and his friends talking about it. Have you guys talked about it? Is he aware of what's going on?
I don't know. I mean, like, he's obviously, first of all, like, his Trump impersonation could give SNL a run for the money. Um, he, we still have a poster from 2016 that he held up during when Trump was elected, and it was it was the No Kings or whatever it was back then, and I still have the picture of him holding that up. So he's certainly been aware of the political reality we've been in just because of our own kind of shock and trauma through dealing with it all. And he does have a sense of, I guess you really have to call it just really morality. Like, we had a sign, we had one of those signs that, like, of course, all the wokes have, that's like, in our house, we value this or that, and there's no illegal, one of those things, basically, maybe it was, no, actually, it may have been just a straight up BLM sign. And mysteriously, the home next to ours, which is a rental, the person who owned it happened to be there, and he was in the midst of, doing some work to get it prepared for the new renters. And our sign disappeared. And, there's just people, I think about Kumail Nanjiani, who tells a story about how when him and his wife got married, and they had a Muslim ceremony, and they had to have the Islamic cleric come in, and he's telling Conan, like, about how this was essentially a difficult time, and he's like, well, what was the guy like? And he goes, imagine how a racist person would describe a Muslim. That's what we had. Like, imagine a guy who would throw away a BLM poster. That's the guy we're talking about here. And Brearley is never shy for confrontation. She is from Philadelphia. And she goes, did you get rid of my Black Lives Matter sign? And he's like, no. He goes, is that still a thing? And Heath was in the car, and he goes vocally, that's racist. So, and this was 2021 maybe. So, this is, he's definitely has some idea of what's happening, what's been happening, what's systemic in terms of racism in our country and whatnot. But this, it's funny, people don't really, we haven't had like the visual confrontation and just the shock and awe of obviously what's happening in Minneapolis or even like Los Angeles, right? It is happening in Texas. I do know a guy who's, he is a noted food writer for a major publication in Texas called Texas Monthly, and he was stopped 3 times in one day by, I think it's the Texas Federal Police is called. Kind of like instead of a state trooper, they have what's called Department of Public Safety, DPS. He was stopped 3 times in one day at checkpoints. He is Latino male, and so is his companion. So, this stuff is happening here. There isn't that kind of shock and awe. He's obviously in a world where he's not losing classmates, unlike some guests we've had who, remember Hadley was saying there was someone at their school who's no longer at the school anymore out of fear. But, in the 10,000 foot view, he's aware of it, but he has not had any immediate trauma for it too. But according to what I'm starting to see on the socials, there are literally, ICE agents now here in Austin, Texas, and it's it's really funny too. One of the posts I read, it's like, oh yeah, they're staying at a Hilton in downtown, and someone goes, I'm never gonna stay at a Hilton now. Whatever, it's his own thing. But what's so funny is like, this is all this is. It's like, yeah, you have this like this law enforcement, like it's just a bunch of people. They just hired them, these are newly hired people. And then they're like, okay, go down there and figure it out. It's like, okay, like, well, let's get you a hotel. It's like, what is this? You know what I mean? Like a bunch of dudes who just started a job. I mean, they're basically like freaking bounty hunters, you know? These aren't people that are like, I'm career law enforcement. And then what's really troubling, and we're just going to have to like wax poetic, just kind of like riff about this. But you see some of the clips from people of these cities who are law enforcement people, who are freaking cops. They're freaking cops. They're freaking cops. They carry guns, okay? They're cops. And they'll be like, you don't need 5 people to take one guy down. You don't need 5. And you're struggling to do so. Like, that's what's happening. One way to really look at this stuff in the very small little minutia of it is this is just not going. That's what I felt to say in the video. This isn't going according to some plan. Is this going right? Is this how you envisioned it? Be one thing, it's kind of crazy, but I remember when they pulled that one gang in Colorado and they just flew them down to El Salvador, which is completely jacked because they still took away due process, right? They still took that away. But you're like, well, I guess it's just a bunch of gang members, and now it's just completely out of control. It's like, oh no, you can't protest. Or, you know what, you can protest, but don't get in the way. It's like, you don't get to decide the degree or relevance of like what is an acceptable protest. You just ensure public safety.
Yeah. Well, I saw Michael Che did a Weekend Update joke about J.D. Vance made a comment that was like, instead of protesting the ICE agents, young people should write op-eds. And he said something like, yeah, just like these young scholars chose to do, and they just show like January 6th picture because it's like
Yeah.
op-eds. And if they were writing op-eds, you would have a problem with that because ultimately these are people, and I'm talking about Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Kristi Noem, people that like, they don't want you to think critically. They don't actually want to have an intellectual debate. They want to crush you and they want you to obey, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that, look, people in power, everyone knows, the people in power like to maintain power. But I think that there has been precedent in America that we talk to each other and we figure things out and we try to find solutions and we don't always agree, and the answer is not violence. That said, there is certainly historical precedent for violence like this. You look to the protests of the Vietnam War, you look to, all the protests and social justice action during the height of the civil rights era, and there was political violence. There were famously assassinations of JFK and RFK and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and, other even, less famous politicians and social activists and preachers. And so, to understand this current political moment in America as an American, as a father, I think it's important that we don't disregard the past and pretend that this is something wholly new. There have been attempts at suppressing people before in this country. You look at footage of the attempts at integrating our schools, and people screaming at black students as they're trying to enter a white-only school. That is essentially, you can draw a line from those incidents to today, right? And I think it's about fear and othering our own neighbors. And ultimately, as a parent, I think the toughest thing is trying to maintain optimism, worrying if we're making the bad choice by staying in this country. Not that we have an option. A lot of people say, I'm leaving, I'm going to Canada, I'm going to New Zealand. And then we know some people who have. That is not an option for most people. And I think the irony of that, to me, is, that people seem to have an intellectual understanding of wanting to flee situations that you don't feel safe in and wanting the best for your kids, but they can't understand how people would want to leave Latin American countries or parts of Mexico that are very dangerous and very corrupt and overridden with crime and mafia and drugs, and doing anything possible just to get here, just to work like in a restaurant or as a landscaper, or as someone's a housekeeper, which I'm sorry to sound stereotypical, but these are the a lot of the jobs that people who are undocumented end up doing, right? Like, let's just be real. I mean, that Greg Giraldo used to have like this great bit about, they're taking our jobs. You're not doing these jobs. Like, shut up. And so then what does it become about? Again, just a lack of social support and systems when industries close down, whether it's coal mines, whether it's car manufacturing factories in Michigan, parts of the country. Those people are unsupported. The economy becomes depressed. People become hooked on painkillers, and you see all this pain, which J.D. Vance outlined in Hillbilly Elegy. And then he got kind of a taste of, oh, I can be powerful. Oh, well, fuck these people. Who cares? I'll just go on the Trump train and maybe I'll be VP. Yeah, maybe I can be president. I don't think he philosophically believes any of these things because he seems to have at one point in his life been a person who was capable of nuanced thought and understanding that America needs to be a place that offers opportunity to all, that certain segments of the population are left behind. Obviously, he leaned more conservative, but I believe he was able to engage in conversations with people who were, I think he had a friend who was trans, who he had this like long email exchange with. But then he, essentially, as often happens, he was like, sweet power, I'm out. And, totally bailed on the neediest Americans. And I think, that is the thing is, you often hear like we have more in common with each other than we have different. And how do we grapple with that ourselves, and how can we teach our kids that we actually have more in common with these people? And by these people, I'm not talking about undocumented people because, they're not doing anything wrong. I'm talking about the people who are supporting ICE because, in my opinion, they're doing something wrong. They're cheering on Gestapo to come, rip people out of their homes, and so how can we find common ground with these people? Is it a lost cause? I mean, what do we do? Ollie, solve it for us.
Well, I mean, it's so funny, but there is something about, when you go back and it is kind of like you look back at history or you look back to like, the example I gave with, the Republicans controlling the White House and the Democrats essentially controlling Congress for, that whole 8-year run was just a general, I think the issue is there's no civility amongst us, like we are going back and forth trading these jabs on socials and stuff. And really it's like, this is not how anything's going to happen. I mean, one of the reasons why I've, frankly, I'll say it too, reluctantly voted for, say, Hillary Clinton. What I regret probably not voting for Al Gore, but I was in California anyways, me voting for Nader, come on, is that, you're going to have to make some concessions in your ideals for, what's going to happen in terms of moving the country that we have forward, right? This is what it is. And I think right now people are thinking like, we're just going to create worlds of absolutes. And I think that we're in a place where our minds are led to believe through creating posts and commenting and trading barbs that we can somehow shape the world into ignoring the reality that we're all here, like we're all here. And I will go back to that idea of like, yes, we need the Billy Bush to at least acknowledge that this is not okay and draw that line, And I think it's really as simple as that. It's like, how do you really want to kill me? Do you want to kill me? Do you want me to die? Do you want this person to die because of what they believe in? I think it's just like you really have to just kind of go take a big deep breath here and kick back. And, lest we forget that all of this stuff, sadly, and what's funny too is it's not just Alex Brady and Renee Good. Other people have died too. It's just they're the ones that are. There's video of them. You know what I mean? There's video of them. There's others who have died as well. The sad part is that this could essentially just have been yet another distraction because there are midterm elections coming up this year, because things aren't exactly going as according to plan generally. I hate to just harp on like, oh, what about the Epstein files? But they don't get released. It makes you wonder it makes you wonder why, is this just a way that the news cycle continues to get hijacked at the expense of freaking human lives? Like it's crazy. It's insane. It feels like a 24 movie that I would only watch little clips on TikTok. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, like it's even just doing that post, just taking in the sheer amount of toxicity. And what's funny? It goes both ways too, because of course I'm gonna lean a certain way, and people make their comments, and then other people go right back. They're just at each other's throats. We're at each other's throats online, and that's something that's like, this isn't really doing well. It's not doing anything, and it is doing a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, I'll say about you said a lot, and I have lots of thoughts like on the finding the perfect candidate. I think that we do tend to idealize these people and sometimes forget that they are just people. I do it too.
Hmm.
We do it with celebrity, we do it with politicians. We think that the bar is higher, and we should have a high bar. I mean, certainly, Donald Trump has set the bar incredibly low, historically low for human beings. What we should expect from another human being. It will fill volumes and volumes the crimes against humanity and the damage he has done to just what we expect from another human. But I think beyond that, the danger too is like, there are people who believe that Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or, Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris or Obama are just too conservative for them. These, extreme left leaning people who are so disgusted by them because they think that they are corporatist Democrats and essentially are the same thing as Mitch McConnell and the same thing as Josh Hawley, and they're all the same. And I think that's really dangerous. I think that it's really dangerous and a false equivalency to say that, well, she's a war hawk, Hillary, and she's the same as George Bush, and she's the same as Donald Trump. I think, it's very easy I believe that line of thinking. I'm not saying that maybe I think it's one thing to say, well, she's more conservative than I wish she was, and I want to push her left. A lot of the people who say, I'm with Bernie Sanders, and I believe that he is our savior, and Chuck Schumer is a shill, and he is doing the bidding of AIPAC, or he is, just in bed with big pharma or big tech or whatever you purport to believe. I think it's a very privileged position, because the reality is that who suffers by not supporting these people, but just doing your best to move them left is, I always say, 14-year-old black girl in Texas who was raped by her stepfather and now has to deliver that baby because Roe versus Wade was overturned because they weren't left-wing enough for you, who is living, perhaps in a home that your generational wealth, inheritance bought you because you want to get on a soapbox. And I saw this a lot. There were stereotypes about the Bernie bros. Of course, anecdotally, I did see it. I did see a lot of straight white men who, don't even necessarily understand their own privilege and think, well, I did it all by myself, who were just like, we gotta go with Bernie, man. And to the extent where it was really damaging, I think, to the party. I'm not saying Hillary Clinton is flawless. No one is.
Hmm.
But I think the irony of all of this is I really like all those people who I just mentioned on the Democratic ticket. I also really like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think she is a gifted speaker. I think she is really good at connecting with young people, with voters. I think she strikes a really hopeful note, but I also think she's willing to do the work. And I have seen kind of this move towards she's now becoming, she's a band in the party, because she'll try to appeal to the biggest swath of people because she understands you got to build a big tent. And I think that it's almost the politics version of I like their first album better. They sold out. I like them
Yeah,
before
yeah,
they
yeah,
signed to a
yeah,
major
yeah.
label. And it's like, did you really like Green Day when they only had, 2,000 fans? Or did you like that you felt that you were part of something? And I think that that's the struggle with politics is people don't it's like you're mine. AOC is mine. I don't want anyone else to have her. Or Bernie is mine, and he shouldn't have, stood with, he should have made a more assertive statement on Israel, Palestine conflict, or like whatever it is. I think you're not going to agree with anyone all the time, but it's about, and to bring this back to being a dad, so often we're trying to like regulate our kids, but really regulate ourselves. I think oftentimes I find myself going, don't lose your shit, don't lose your shit, don't lose your shit, because it's really easy to scream back at a kid, maybe not right away, but if they've been screaming at you nonstop all day, you want to scream back at them. And I think you're talking about this echo chamber online where people are just yelling at each other and trading jabs and thinking that they're so clever. And I think that really, instead of listening to people, we're just thinking, what can I say so I look cool, so I look good, so I look funny, so I look smart. And I think, I call it the drop the mic moment. Everyone thinks that they're going to have this drop the mic moment. We envision it. It's this idealized version. It's like the George Costanza comeback line of like, I'm going to say this, and then they're going to stand there and go, whoa, you blew me away with the way you phrased your comeback rhetorically. But it never happens. It
Mhm.
doesn't happen. And I'm not saying that if you lead with empathy and curiosity that it will be returned, but it definitely won't be returned if you're just trying to come up with like some sort of like, this is why your side is stupid. And so like, it's really hard to engage in these conversations when they're not really conversations. They're soliloquies that we're all having kind of next to each other, right? I will say my soapbox speech and then you say yours, and we're kind of like looking at each other, facing in each other's direction, but we're not actually listening to each other. And then you go, well, why should I listen to a racist? Then don't. Then don't engage with them. Why don't you go try to move someone who you think you can change?
Mhm.
Rather than yell at someone who you think you genuinely can't change. If you believe I cannot change their mind, then what are you doing? You're not helping. Why don't you go talk to somebody whose mind you can change?
What's interesting isn't so much that we started this thing talking about, you know, people who just died, for seemingly no reason. There really isn't a reason they should have died. Their deaths were really initially feel to many of us as purely unjustified, unnecessary. An unnecessary action, an unnecessary reaction to people exercising their First Amendment and actually Second Amendment rights, apparently. I'm not a gun owner, so it's not really on top of my mind, but it's true. It's in there, the old Bill of Rights Constitution thing. But what's more troubling, or the biggest issue too, is it's the tenor of American politics, And, it's funny, like, it's weird, but like you look back at the old sound bites, right? And I know it, like people will be like, well, I mean, we're almost guilty of it too. It's like we can look back and, Ronald Reagan, all that stuff, clear flaws in policy, period, point blank. We demand a far more progressive version of America than what that was. But just even how we all seem to crave the old tenor, the old demeanor of how we treat and interact each other with respect. I mean, you can go back to the Obama McCain sound bites and you're just like, it feels like therapy. It feels like therapy. And this feels like we're in a household where the parents are at each other's throats, and it's
Well,
traumatizing.
I'll say I agree on some of that, right? Because I think that where we get in danger zone is thinking that way back when things were so civil, right? Because again, you look at those lunch counter protests during the '60s, and that was not civil, right?
Right.
Look at trying to integrate schools and hearing people say that they don't belong here. That wasn't civil. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think there are those moments, and you can cherry pick them, and they should be held as an example of the way I think productive conversations can be had. And I think McCain Obama, I think Romney Obama was a model for that. I think you can find
Mm-hmm.
other examples too. But I don't think that it's necessarily like a straight line as if that it's just always gone downhill. I think again we've had peaks and valleys of civility, and we have
Yeah.
certain figures and events and times in history or parts of the world where there was civility that we can use as, hey, that's something that is to be modeled. And it's such a low bar. But I do think about that clip where they said, someone said to John McCain, Obama's not American and he's not a citizen. And he stopped the person and said, hey, he is American and we don't agree on things, but that's not how we talk about our fellow Americans, And like, it was like, wow. I
Yeah.
mean, to see someone defend someone's citizenship like that. And I think that is the type of behavior you want to model. And unfortunately, Meghan McCain didn't learn those lessons from her father. But, hey, look, we
Yeah.
try our best.
I think too, really, when I think about those moments I bring up, it is really at least the on camera civility between our politicians. But you bring up a larger point, which is really what's underneath ice, right? Which is America's long, long, long relationship with racism, period. And clearly, as much as some people might say, oh, that was a long time ago, we sure don't act like it. The reversion, all the strides that I think America has made to the point where me growing up as Gen X is like, oh, we've moved past this, right? Isn't really true. Racism is embedded in America. And it quietly sat there. I mean, you know what? It's almost like you have a disease and you didn't cure it. It just went dormant. And now we're having a flare up that maybe now might be spreading uncontrollably again. And I think a lot of that too has to come down to, and you can jump right into Independence Hall and how there were those plaques that were removed that talk about moments that happened in America, happened to be about slavery, because that stuff happened. Oh, we're going to remove that because we're bad mouthing American. We don't want that. It's like, you gotta, no, this is what it is. And that is basically going backwards in terms of acknowledging past injustices. And the fact that we don't want to let that go, or we as a country, half of us are like, yeah, why are you bad mouthing America? That was like a long time ago. So now let's pretend like it never happened. Before it was a long time ago. Now it never happened because you're removing the history of it, and you can't just selectively do that. But it's a powerful tool, though, as we've seen throughout history. What we put in our history books and what we leave out. Yeah, it's that therein. I mean, ultimately with ice, it's it's evil genius, right? To be like, oh yeah, this is the problem, and you can look at it. You can point them out in a crowd and go, that's them. It's them because they look different than us, and that's underneath all of it.
Well,
That's
yeah, and I mean, you are seeing people saying, well, look, it's you gotta know who's a citizen and not, which, okay, fine. I don't know that anyone's making you unsafe, but I did see a clip where one guy, one ICE agent was like, well, you have an accent. You have a different accent than me. I mean, literally, it's like the most blatant, disgusting racism. Like, it's not even, they're not even pretending, right? I did want to share this quote, this classic Mr. Rogers thing that, has become a bit of a cliche, but I feel like, maybe somebody's hearing it for the first time, or maybe somebody just feels like they need to hear it again. But Fred Rogers said, this is the quote: when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And so I think, you look at the people who are showing up. Some people are saying, I've never been to a protest before, but this is wrong. I can't believe this is happening in our community. And you see police officers, firefighters, you see EMS, you see people who are speaking up. Just, try when you can to find the people who are doing the right thing and follow them, model after them, or, go your own way and feel inspired by them, is the advice of one Fred Rogers, also known as Mr. Wore a lot of sweaters.
supposedly had tattoos up. He wore those sweaters to cover his tattoos.
Come on. You
Yeah,
believe
it went all the way up to the neck. Right up to where the tie was.
it? Uh-huh. So there's a lot of misinformation out there too. Like where can you, if you want to be a rational person who's just getting the facts and stay updated, you could recommend Reuters coverage. It's just the facts, what's happening. on the ground, highly factual newswire updates. Not everybody gets it 100% right, but Reuters is a pretty good source. Maybe not for those Facebook commenters of yours. Perhaps they want to go to other sources, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to give them any airtime because they are liars. But Reuters is good. Washington Post, again, not perfect, owned by that evil genius, Mr. Bezos. But they are also offering a pretty robust analysis on the shootings and just ICE raids in general. The Guardian is reporting on the constitutionality of everything that's happening in Minneapolis and across the country, and of course the lawsuits, and I'm sure there will be many to come. And when it comes to video, you got to be careful with what's AI, what's not. There's such a trove of video on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, and it can be valuable, right? I think we talked about like how being able to see what is essentially primary sources. You know, we grew up in history class learning about what is a primary source. This is it. But you have to learn critical thinking skills and media literacy to know what is accurate and what is not. Because again, like we said before, the people in power don't want you to believe your eyes. They want you to believe your eyes are lying to you. And so I think just being really smart and careful with what you're consuming, but also knowing like you can take a break. You can turn on the old Food Network, the apolitical, we're here for everybody, everything's fine and dandy and ain't no problems in the world. Turn on a little HGTV, and find yourself in a little cozy cocoon of no
House
problem.
remodeling.
Yeah. Although I think HGTV is pretty political itself. We have a budget of $835,000. Well, where'd you get this money? What do you do for a living?
I mean, we could also plug maybe Netflix because of their international library, you know?
Bingo.
There's that. There's that as well.
Yeah. I also want to give a few practical takeaways. This isn't a big questions episode, but if your kids do bring it up, if they do find their way into some of these horrific news stories, just be honest with them, but calm is advice. You can tell them whatever facts you want to share. But also, as we always say, ask questions, ask what they heard. You're like a mob boss, trying to, would you hear about that thing? In Goodfellas, remember that? Which thing? The Brooklyn thing or the New Jersey thing? What'd you hear about that thing?
I'm surprised you watched that one. I feel like
I
you're a little...
love Goodfellas. Goodfellas is a classic film, which we can talk about at another time. And you want to correct any misinformation gently. Don't tell them, well, you're wrong, that's not what happened. Don't be one of those trolls. But you can gently, lovingly tell them, hey, actually, I think maybe you're getting your facts a little bit.
So fake news, but not all not without the caps lock.
Yeah, I think that might be some fake news, sweetheart.
Yeah.
And I don't really know how to end this one. This is a continuing conversation, but I'm just glad that we were able to, as the young people say, give space to these thoughts and feelings. And also, if you're a listener listening to us on Apple or Spotify or the RSS or some other place you get your podcasts, I don't know who gets podcasts anywhere else. I guess you're more interesting than us, but if you're out there, shoot us a note, shoot us a DM.
Let us know what you think. I'd also add this too, as I had to put together my little video and statement about all this stuff. One of the things that's been profound is how much we now get our news through social media, right? And as I put together a social media post, I felt compelled to not only back up my sentiments with some observations, but not only from legacy media that has to actually take the time to carefully and methodically write this stuff out. And Lord knows I am not the biggest advocate of pure legacy media, but I also did something, which was I went to news sources that frankly sit more right from myself, starting with easy lift like the Wall Street Journal and then moving into National Review. And I did the Washington Examiner. I always get them confused, Times or Examiner. And yes, I cherry picked the quotes I wanted, but what was amazing is how from these publications, which frankly aren't actually as right as it gets, but at the same time as I kind of, whimsically look back to the days of Ronnie Reagan and Tip O'Neill sipping on a scotch in the halls of power, essentially still keeping white males in power. It was like, well, at least they didn't raise their voices and wrote tweets in caps lock, which was a kinder and gentler time for our country, Neil. But I do think sometimes looking in at where other people are coming from and seeing their information, and certainly being able to at least kind of say, hey, just so you know, the Wall Street Journal, not exactly the paragon of liberal journalism, brings serious question into the version of the facts that is being presented by the current administration. And it does remind me of a really interesting publication, I think it's still around, but I knew about it 20-ish years ago, called The Week, that would literally find stories and find versions from, say, The Guardian and the Wall Street Journal or the National Review and the New York Times, and essentially kind of take the same issue and see it through the lens of these different publications, because even legacy news sources pick and choose what they put in their article. And it doesn't hurt to listen a little bit, take in a little bit more information to at least help process what's happening, because it is profound and it is traumatizing. Brought to you
Well,
by Vespa.
yeah. Thanks, Vespa. Thanks for always being here.
Yeah.
Let's ride on out of here. What do you say?
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I would say it's all going to be okay, but not as easy as talking about strollers, I tell you. Got a new comment on my post.